Okay, so welcome to our event tonight, Blue Sky Thinking, Fresh Ideas to Encourage Us to Fly Less. So our first speaker is Anna Hughes, who is Director of Frightfully UK, and she's going to tell us about their project encouraging people to pledge to stay grounded for a year. And following Anna, we're going to hear from Emma Kemp, who works for climate organisation Possible, and she's going to tell us about their project called Climate Perks, which encourages employers to support staff wishing to reduce their flying for holidays. And after the two speakers, we'll have time for Q&As. So as they're speaking, as we're going through the event, if anybody wants to put questions or comments in the chat box, please do. Ia will be keeping an eye out, and we'll put these questions to our speakers later. So I think now I'm just going to hand over to Anna, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and hello everybody, and hi everybody watching online as well. Really nice to be able to share some thoughts with you and some of my experiences in the campaign that I run, Flight Free UK. First of all, I think the best stories are the personal ones. So I'm just going to talk to you for a little while about my personal journey to being what I am now call myself, which is a flight free adventurer. So I have, as many people, as I'm sure you all are kind of similar, I've always been aware of carbon issues and environmental issues and tried to do things in my life to reduce my carbon footprint. And one of the main things is travel. I've always ridden a bike. And when I got to my 20s, I decided that I wasn't going to fly as a way of, as part of my green carbon lifestyle, low carbon lifestyle. But that decision kind of in my early 20s coincided with my desire to travel and to see the world and to, have adventures and be make all those discoveries and find out about myself and all that kind of stuff as well. So I was thinking, well, how do I unite these two things, this desire to really, really keep my carbon footprint low? And, I had decided absolutely I wasn't going to get on a plane for any reason. And I had flown a little bit before that, just around Europe and once to New York. So there are a few flights in my past, but yeah, I had decided that that wasn't for me anymore. But yeah, how would I reconcile that with wanting to travel and to be an adventurer? So I decided that I would use my bicycle as a form of transport, as a form of exploration. And I was thinking, oh, which country could I go cycling in? What would be the best adventure? And I actually thought, well, I don't really know that much about Britain. So what I'm going to do is cycle around the entire coastline of the UK. And that's what I did. I set off from my home in London along the River Thames out to where the Thames meets the sea. And I kind of liked the whole poetry of it, because all I had to do was keep the sea in my sights on my right hand side. And if I just followed the coastline, eventually I'd get back to the mouth of the River Thames again, and then follow the Thames back into London and back where I started. And I really loved the simplicity of that. Just cycling in a big circle kind of appealed. And of course, as Craig said earlier, riding your bike and leaving your house and your adventure starting as soon as you've shut your front door and having everything with you, that's a fantastic form of adventure and a really, really low carbon one. And yeah, so that was kind of my challenge. Could I find a real genuine adventure experience on my doorstep? And the answer, I'm very pleased to say, was yes, absolutely. I spent 2.5 months cycling around the coast of Britain, 4,000 miles, so not an insignificant distance. Had I cycled in a straight line, I'd have ended up in Iraq. So yeah, it was a huge challenge, and I did learn a lot about myself, but mostly I learned about the place I live, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And it very much cemented for me the idea that travel is not where you go, it is what you make of it. And I spent a long time after I returned, trying to communicate that with people and to show that you can have the adventure of a lifetime even without crossing the sea at all, by even staying on this tiny island. There is so much to discover. And even having cycled this huge distance in the UK, I realized that there's as much to see as I had already seen. I've done plenty of cycle touring since, mostly within the UK. There's just so much to see, and even places I've been before, you can return there and see new things that you didn't notice the first time. So yeah, massive advocate of UK travel, UK exploration, and because it has the huge added bonus that it doesn't involve a plane. So yeah, that's the motivation. So that was my first big adventure. My most recent big adventure was going to Nice, and this was a long time ago now, 2019. Do you remember the days when we could travel and cross borders freely? So yeah, end of 2019, I cycled down from Dieppe on the north coast of France all the way down to Nice, 1,000 miles. That took me a couple of weeks because a lot of my cycling ends up on the coast. I love the coast, as you can probably tell from having cycled around the entire thing. I really love swimming in the sea, but I decided, yeah, the North Sea is kind of cold. I've been swimming off the coast of Fife. That's really cold. I'd quite like to try the Mediterranean for a change. So yeah, I set off on my bike and I arrived there in Nice a couple of weeks later. And it was totally amazing and a real adventure. And the thing I noticed the most about it when I was swimming in the Mediterranean off the front at Nice is that the airport is right there. And every few minutes a plane took off, and I looked at everybody on the beach and I thought, oh my gosh, you can bet that most people arrived here by plane. And then when I came to go home, I actually took the train home. So I didn't cycle home, I took the train back, and it was a 9-hour journey back to London, an absolutely magical journey because train travel is very relaxing, and it's great to be able to, sit there and wander up to the cafe bar whenever you want and have a drink and go to the toilet, and it's a very civilized way of traveling. But also just looking out the window and seeing my entire journey kind of unravel itself in reverse, getting back to Paris and then back to London. That was a really magical part of it as well. And I thought, this is the experience that you just simply don't get when you fly. Yeah, 9 hours, sure, that's longer than a flight, but not that much longer when you've factored in getting to the airport and baggage claim on the other end and doing your transfers and blah blah. And then the cost, it wasn't that much more than flying either, probably about equal in the end. But it was definitely worth it. What do you pay for? You also pay for the experience and the fact that you're having a very, very nice journey. But yeah, that's my personal choice. I'm very motivated to do this. And when the campaign that I'm director of Flight Free UK started at the beginning of 2019 to inspire other people to make those choices as well. So there are two things that we do. We inform people about the climate impact of aviation and inspire them to travel by other means. And one of the main things that I found in doing this, and I knew before, I've worked in behaviour change for a long time, mainly with road transport, but now to do with aviation. And it's a lot of people choose to fly because they don't consider that there's another option. So I really felt that when I was in Nice, when I was swimming in that sea and the planes kept taking off and I was looking at the people sitting on the beach, I was thinking they flew here because they just assumed that that's how you get there. It probably didn't cross their mind that you can get on a train in London and arrive in Nice after just connecting in Paris, and who doesn't want to spend a couple of hours relaxing in Paris? It's just not on our radar because since the era of cheap flights came in, the marketing, the headline prices are so attractive. Everything just kind of pushes us towards booking that flight. The fact that you could just do it with one click, it wasn't that difficult actually to just book the 2 trains across France, because you can do it in one go through Rail Europe, which is a very useful website, raileurope.co.uk. It used to be Loco too, but now Rail Europe, and you can it's really good for finding your rail travel. It also tells you how much carbon you've saved, which is really important consumer information. But yeah, it's not intuitive. It's to do something like that unless you know about it. So that's part of our mission at Flight Free UK, simply to tell people that these options exist and then to inspire them to choose those options. So not only is it sharing how wonderful these journeys can be, talking about how if you're going for a business trip, for example, you can actually work on the train, whereas you can't really work when you're flying, because the time you spend most of your time standing in a queue. When you're on a leisure trip, it's so much more relaxing, and if you're with friends, you can sit around a table, you can share food, share drinks, share conversations, all that kind of stuff. It's a really fantastic way to travel. So sharing those stories and inspiring people to choose this is part of our campaign as well. But mostly it is about the climate information, because that is missing from so many of the narratives that we hear. We hear that you can fly carbon neutral if you just offset it. We hear that green fuels are coming, green flights are coming, we can all fly electric. These things are misleading. We can talk about offsets later if you're interested. We can even talk about green technology as well. We can delve into that a little bit more if you're interested. But these things, generally, the message is this stuff, first of all, it doesn't actually solve the emissions problem, especially when we're talking about technology. It might be coming at some point in the future, but it's not here now. And now is when we need to reduce those emissions. So it's sharing this information, and also talking about the reality of the actual travel. So, for example, for that journey from Nice back to the UK, my emissions per person when traveling by train were in the single figures. So less than 10 kilograms of CO2 for that journey. Whereas had I flown, it would be in the hundreds. The difference is so stark. You can save up to 90% or more on some journeys by taking the train, 90% of your emissions by taking the train. And that we just shouldn't forget that we're in a climate emergency. And so trying to have that kind of information inform our choices is absolutely vital. How do we choose the green choice if we just don't know? So those are the two pillars of our campaign: information and inspiration. And as Craig mentioned, we have a pledge. So that's kind of our sort of headline campaigning tool. We ask people to pledge to take a year off flying, and that's our behavior change method. So if you challenge yourself to travel without flying for a year, you can first of all discover the alternatives. And once you have tried the alternatives, that might be all you need to say, right, when I'm traveling within Europe, I'm not going to fly again, because it's so much more enjoyable to take the train, because it's possible, because this, that, and the other. Or maybe I'm going to travel closer to home. So, that wonderful holiday I just had in Whitby, whereas usually I go to Mallorca, I'm going to try and explore a bit more of the UK, or the things on my doorstep a little bit more. So these are the things we're trying to inspire with the pledge. And then the other side of it is kind of the social effect. So yes, pledging not to fly for a year will reduce your carbon footprint. It will bring emissions down, especially if you're someone who flies maybe 2 or 3 times or more per year. But the most of the impact comes in the social conversations that happen around this. So everybody has an influence around the people, on the people around them. Me, so I'm an author. I've written books about my adventures. I share quite a lot that I'm a flight-free adventurer and I can have all these experiences without using planes, and that in itself inspires other people or influences other people to maybe not cut out flying completely, but to reduce the amount they fly. And just having that conversation with those around us just causes people to think, and again, they might not stop flying straight away, but next time they book their flight, you can bet they're thinking about it. So these things are all really important, because it's that social shift that we need. As I said before, it's normal for many people to just book a flight, not necessarily without thinking, but just that's the normal thing for many people. Not for everyone, of course. Broadly speaking, only about half of the UK population flies in any given year, so it's definitely not a normal thing to do for many people. But if you're one of those people who do fly, then it seems to be that everybody else does. So by disrupting that and saying I'm taking a flight for a year, then that can influence and change the conversation. So yeah, challenging that norm is really important. And finally, just to kind of finish off the explanation of the campaign's aims, finally, that shift in the norm feeds up to the top. So we don't pretend that one individual action is going to solve the climate crisis. It's when lots of people make this decision together that we actually make a significant difference. But more than that, if we can demonstrate that people are willing to change their behavior and are choosing rail travel over plane travel, for example, then that's where the investment will go. It's about supply and demand, and it's about the consumer choices. We have a lot of power as consumers. If we're buying an air ticket, we're basically saying, I support this industry. If we are refusing to buy that air ticket or putting our money elsewhere, for example, in a train into the rail industry, we are saying, this is what I want. And yes, there are huge difficulties with the pricing system. I'm sure Emma will speak about that as well. Air travel is just so much cheaper than rail travel in many instances, and that definitely needs to change. One of the things we would like to see is the environmental cost of travel reflected in the price of the ticket. So wouldn't it be amazing if the plane ticket to Nice were 10 times more expensive than the train ticket? That would definitely have an effect on consumer behavior. So all of these things are what we're trying to work towards. And we're currently collecting pledges for our Flight Free 2021 campaign. Here we are. Will you be flight free in 2021? Obviously, we're nearly halfway. Well, we're over halfway through 2021 now, so we're going to be launching our 2022 pledge at the beginning of September to collect pledges ahead of that year. It's a really difficult year, and last year as well, to be talking about this kind of thing, as I'm sure that you all appreciate. Obviously, lots of planes are grounded anyway, which makes it quite strange to be trying to say to people, you know, could you take a flight for a year? They're like, yeah, but that's sort of happening, it's out of my hands. But what we really want to do is inspire people to make this as a choice, not to have that choice taken away. So COVID, regardless of COVID, we still need to make the case that the climate friendly choice is not to fly, and to inspire people to make that choice. So there we are. Should I put the website in the chat, Craig, or is that already in there?
I think Ia already did it earlier on.
Brilliant,
It's in there.
thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much, Anna. Lots of information and inspiration. And I think that bit where you said that people just don't consider that there are other options, and that just speaks to so many conversations that I've had about lots of different things to do with climate change, to plastic use and everything. And people are just, they stick with the status quo. So yeah, I think that's very important to challenge that, isn't it? And to speak about it. Perfect. Right, so I'll introduce our next speaker. So next we're going to hear from Emma Kemp. So Emma is campaign manager at Possible, which is a climate change charity focusing on positive practical action. She has 7 years experience in the sector and currently heads up Possible's Climate Perks initiative, which is featured in publications including Harper's Bazaar, The Guardian and the Financial Times. So I'll hand over to you now, Emma. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really great, Anna. That was a really nice, like inspirational talk. This made me regret doing a presentation because I feel like sometimes just talking is better than presentations, but I'm gonna hope that this balances it out and that people are keen for it. But I'm gonna do lots of the talking style over it as well. So hopefully that's okay. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Can I share my screen? Yes, okay, cool. Give me one moment. Can you guys see that okay? Okay, great. Let's start with this then. Great. So yes, hi. My name is Emma. I work at Possible and I head up our Climate Perks scheme. Just to talk a little bit about my background as well. I've worked in the kind of environmental sector, as Craig said, for like 7 years, but I've really considered myself to be super concerned about climate change and, you know, very passionate about the solutions since I was about 13, 14. But it was only really in the last 3 years, I would say, that I started to really understand the impact of flying. Because as Anna says, there's not that much awareness around it. And I think it's something that people spoke about quite a lot, maybe in the noughties. And then there was just seemed to be a bit of a drop off. And I'm not sure exactly what happened around that time, but everyone kind of stopped speaking about it for, you know, for the most part. So there's been this real like knowledge gap. And in that time, you know, the low cost flights like Ryanair and EasyJet have just absolutely shot up. And particularly my generation and millennials have, you know, really grown up in that era of these low cost flights, and, you know, get to Barcelona for 19 quid, which all sounds very appealing. And so even as someone who, you know, was wildly concerned about climate change, you know, I grew up in a very working class family. I was working a job on the side when I was a teenager, earning like £3 an hour, and I literally spent all of that money on Riverford boxes because I was like, everything must be organic, because I couldn't work out what to do about climate change, and that was my first, you know, instinct from my googling. So I was very committed, although maybe slightly misguided, and that is really demonstrable in my travel habits, you know, because as soon as I was 18 and, you know, just about could pull together enough money to do a cheap holiday with my friends, I just thought, where will we fly? Like, even as someone who didn't grow up flying, my family never flew. I never flew with my family as a child. It is so ingrained in our culture and in our British holiday culture that, you know, even as someone who didn't grow up with it, you just go straight to, oh, where are we going to fly to? Let's just go to Skyscanner. So the aviation industry really have done a fantastic job of putting that into everyone's minds. And so we do have some making up to do on our side of it. And so, yeah, it was really when I started working at Possible, and people there were really talking about flying and, you know, really actually starting to address how problematic it was. Because it's one thing to say, oh, it's bad, but everyone's doing it. So I don't want to change my behavior. But once you're around other people who are like, oh yeah, actually I haven't flown for 5 years, or, oh, I'm actually trying to reduce my flights, I'm only taking one every other year, that you start to really be like, okay, you know, yeah, I should also do this. It's classic, just so social kind of influence. And so, yeah, the last few years, obviously I haven't been able to fly because of COVID for the last year and a half, but prior to that, I had stopped flying for the last year and a half, I think it was roughly. And it wasn't just that I'd stopped flying, it was that I started swapping those journeys out, the same trips that I would have taken, and much more interesting trips they turned out to be, in fact, because I took the train. And so, yeah, I'm also very passionate about this now, because when I did my first train trip, which was like 2.5 weeks around Italy on my own. It was my first solo journey. And it totally changed my perspective on travel. It was just beautiful. And I saw so many things that I wouldn't have seen if I'd have just got plonked in an airport in the middle of nowhere and then taken a transfer to my hotel. It was just a completely different way of traveling. And I feel like once you can get people to do it once, they see that, and then it becomes wildly more appealing. So getting onto climate perks, and how this is a way to kind of nudge people in that direction. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of background behind climate perks and how we got to deciding that this was a good idea. So just starting out, I usually just ask people to think about all these different low carbon behaviors and which one would have the biggest impact on reducing an average person's carbon footprint in a year. And usually in the kind of back in the pre-COVID days, when it was like an in-person thing, it would be like a hands up. I won't put you guys on the spot on camera, but usually people, you know, a lot of the times people think that it's going car free or recycling all the waste you produce, and obviously these things are super impactful. There's been some really good, I think it's a YouGov study where they asked people what the most impactful thing they think they could do for climate was, and people just often have things really misunderstood, and the low impact things are perceived as the high impact things and vice versa. And so it's important to give people the proper information so they can make the correct decisions and not be a 13-year-old spending their pocket money on Riverford boxes. And so obviously, if we go on to the next slide, we can see that avoiding one transatlantic flight is, you know, really dwarfs other ways of cutting your carbon. And obviously we know that climate change, as Anna has correctly pointed out, we're in quite a crisis, it's quite a bad situation, and so we kind of need all eggs in the basket at this point. So all of these are good things to do. You know, is super passionate about not wasting food, things like that, which, you know, you kind of starting quite small. It's actually, you know, it's really good. And I think sometimes people make the mistake of getting frustrated and being like, that's it's nothing in comparison to this big thing. But actually, those things are often a gateway drug into taking bigger steps to combat climate change. And really, you should be encouraging those. And, you know, once people start to identify it as, you know, oh, I'm a person that recycles, I'm a person that, you know, doesn't like waste, then it's easier for them to take steps to, you know, maybe start living car free or start reducing the amount they're flying by 50%. That all becomes more feasible. You know, people don't go from 0 to 100 generally. So these are all great steps you can take, but flying is super carbon intensive. And so it's a really good one for people to crack. So 85% of people in the UK are concerned or very concerned about climate change now. That is based on some of the more recent stats, but this has just gone up massively in the last few years. And I think, you know, we can fairly put that down to just increased conversations about it. And a lot of that would have been driven by, you know, Greta Thunberg bringing that into the media, and even the XR protests, you know, for even when things don't work out perfectly all of the time, just getting people talking about something just makes it, you know, brings it to the forefront of people's minds. And so people have got more concerned about climate change, which is a great starting point. We know that cutting down flying is one of the single most powerful actions those of us who travel can do to cut our carbon footprint. And so Climate Perks looks to make this easier for people. So the challenge, these are also some fun stats if you're stats people. You're going to have a great time on the next couple of slides. 1 in 5, less than 1 in 5 of the world's population has ever stepped foot on a plane. And so while, you know, in the UK flying is super normalized, and it's relatively rare nowadays, particularly in the kind of the boomer and the younger generations, that you meet someone who has never ever flown, although it's more common than you'd expect. But globally, you know, it's less than 1 in 5 people, so it's not that common. And actually Brits fly more than the people of any other nation, which is a fascinating statistic. 1 in 12 international travelers is British at any given time. And so we're really we're in a, you know, bad situation here, but it's also a very powerful situation because we have, you know, the kind of most obvious extreme normalization of this behavior. And so we're in a great position to change it. And there's no way that anyone can point to another country and say that they're doing it worse because it's us. So yeah, we're in a strong position here. On current trends, flying is going to account for roughly 40% of all UK carbon emissions by 2050. So while other sectors, you know, steel and manufacturing are all being forced to decarbonize and really, you know, having that pushed on them as a serious priority, flying right now is getting a bit of a easy break. Government data shows that within the UK, 70% of all flights are taken by just 15% of the population. These frequent flyers are more likely to be professionals with disposable income. This is kind of feeding more into why Climate Perks is kind of targeted at these people. But there's also some interesting stuff around when people are asked in the UK, these are the stats on how many times per year they were flying. 48% of people don't fly in the UK in any given year. Some of you probably won't find that surprising, as some of you might. I often find that in cities, people tend to be like, what? Whereas outside of cities, it's a little bit less surprising. You know, my family don't really fly, but not so much for environmental reasons. Whereas once I moved to London and, you know, made friends here, it was much more frequent. After that 48%, 25% of people are only taking 1 to 2 flights a year, 20% are taking 3 to 6, and only 8% are taking 7 or more flights. So even if people are taking 4 or more flights, they're kind of getting into that frequent flyer bracket. Yes, so Climate Perks is a scheme which rewards staff when they choose to travel by land or sea. So we work through employers, and the employers offer their staff journey days or sustainable travel days on top of their annual leave. So you wouldn't think of it as more annual leave, you'd more think of it as something similar to volunteer leave. If you've ever worked somewhere that has volunteer leave, it's usually that you get a few days out of the office every year that are voluntary, you can take them. Sorry, voluntary and volunteer, that's a bit confusing wording. They're volunteer leave days, but you don't have to take them. You can request and say, oh, I want to go volunteer for this local charity for 3 days. That will use up my allocated time. So it's just days out of the office where you're paid as if you were in the office, but it's to do something that's just good. It's considered as a good thing. And this is like that because it's, good for the climate and for your mental health and just for many other reasons, I would argue. The eligible journeys will be rail, coach, sea journeys. So that is ferries as well. And usually we focus on continental European destinations, as Anna's right pointed out, that they are the most easy to reach. So generally those are the obvious ones, but also between mainland Britain and Northern Ireland, Ireland and the British Islands. The policy is very flexible though, and each employer individually decides exactly what they want it to look like. We have a template, but they might adjust it depending on where they're based or what they consider their priorities to be. But this is the kind of template we give people. For example, this is an example kind of journey that you would take from London to Berlin. So you can see, I don't know if this is showing the full screen, hopefully it is. But you can see where usually you'd be in the working day in the purple, you're working all day, and then you hop off and get this flight. And then, and then when you return, again, you're working. But these are where the climate, in the pink is the Climate Perks journey days, replacing that chunk of time. And, obviously the main reason for this is everyone has this limited amount of annual leave, and people, despite the fact that in the UK and in Europe, we obviously get much more than in countries like America of annual leave as our right. People are understandably nervous to suddenly spend that time on the train when in their head they should already be at the beach by now. So the extra time that it can take to travel like this can be one of the biggest barriers. In the initial research we did prior to Climate Perks, we found that it was the main barrier people cited, slightly above cost. And so, hence our focus on the extra time that it takes. So we're looking to give people back that time, and they feel like they're getting a bit of a bonus because they're out of the office. And they can just enjoy the journey. These are some visualizations of the kind of stats that Anna was referring to, but it's just an enormous carbon cut when you look at the numbers. Up the top, it says 1 return flight to Berlin clocks up the same amount of carbon as 13 return train journeys. And then here we've got, this first one is Mallorca, 92% carbon cut, Nice, 94%, Barcelona, 92% again. So they're really, really, really chunky, really substantial carbon cuts. It's not just 20% or something. It's really, really huge. And so it's just super valuable behavior. In terms of who's doing Climate Perks at the moment, we did actually launch at the beginning of 2020, so obviously great timing. But a lot of these employers, are super, I've recently had some really good feedback from some of them. It was Alliance actually, which is a magazine, and they emailed me to say, although no one's actually been able to use it yet because of the pandemic, we did a staff survey the other day, and this was rated like unanimously as the most popular perk that we offer, the most valuable by everyone. So people generally seem really happy with it still, and everyone's quite keen to start using it properly once things return to some sort of normal. Having said that, people, a few people did get to use it prior to coronavirus, and there's a few people started early in 2019 who had some really, really nice trips. Everything from, some people did some skiing ones, and then I used it to go to Croatia, which was amazing, which was rail and boat. Just awesome trip. If anyone ever wants to go to Croatia, let me know and I'll give you my route. As I said, this has been super popular with the media, like surprisingly popular, which I think speaks to a wider trend of people wanting solutions to this issue, and there not being enough solutions, because we never even put out a press release or tried to get media. They just really came to us, which just, yeah, as I said, just shows there's like just an appetite for people to present solutions and people to, you know, visualize how they might start to take these more sustainable journeys. And it was even everyone from, you know, it wasn't just the Guardian, it was the Telegraph, Financial Times, Harper's Bazaar writing a piece on it. I mean, that's a real highlight. But yeah, it was all really, really positive, and we had great feedback from that. And so yeah, that was my little Climate Perks presentation. I think we're doing okay for time. Yes, okay, good. Yeah, I think that is pretty much everything I wanted to run over, but I'm very, very happy to chat more. We can do some questions. I'd love to bring Anna back in to discuss. Over to you, Craig.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. If you could just stop sharing your screen, then yeah, we can have a chat and see if anybody has got any questions. That was fantastic. A great project. Very excited to hear about it. Yeah, I'm kind of like, I think I'm quite surprised when I hear the stat that 48% of people don't fly. And I think that shows you how ingrained it is in my life, that I just assumed that everybody was doing what I do. And that surprised me that the number is so high. And just that has put something in my head, you know. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And just to make sure I'm super clear on that, it's not like 48% of people don't fly ever, but it's in any given year they might not have flown. So it might be, you know, they fly next year, but then someone who flew last year isn't flying that year. So yeah, it's just less common than we think it is.
Yeah, I think the absolute numbers is 25% have never flown or never fly, not have never flown, but never fly. But yeah,
in the UK.
Right, yeah, in the UK, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So Ia, has any questions come into the chat box?
Yes, there is one. Or a comment. I don't know if you want to share it, Alan, or would you like me to?
I can read it out. Yeah, so it was a question for Emma about climate perps. I was talking to someone about it, so I thought I saw it somewhere, and I thought that's a great idea. And this is someone who works in a big-ish publishing company in London, and she seemed to think that it would not be something that would fly in her company. Excuse the pun.
So to speak.
Because it might be seen as a kind of a discriminatory thing, and the reasons that we came up with someone who, for whatever reason, wouldn't be able to take public transport very easily, but I suppose they would also struggle on a plane. But the more relevant one, I suppose, would be people who necessarily had family long way overseas and needed to spend their holidays going to see them, so wouldn't be able to take advantage of this kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for raising that, because it's just useful when people ask these questions so that we can discuss them. I have had someone ask me about that one time before. And number one, I would say that you have to think about it in sense of it's a perk. It's not a mandatory thing. No one's stopping anyone doing anything, and no one's losing anything importantly from this being implemented. It just means that people who are doing a good thing, it makes that easier for them, and it makes more people able to do that. So it's an enabler. But also, you know, I'm confident that it's not discriminatory, because one of our first members was a law firm, and I feel like that's quite a good recommendation. I did run this past them, and they were like, no. But also, when you think about other perks that employers offer, they usually, you know, obviously maternity leave, paternity leave, but very, very frequently offering gym memberships, you know, food discounts, all these things, you know, childcare vouchers and cycle to work schemes. All of those things, you know, in any way could be considered discriminatory. Clearly, they won't apply to everyone. You know, particularly that might be because of disabilities. It might be because of preference. It might be because of, you know, there's so many reasons these things won't apply to everyone, and that's why they're perks, and that's why companies usually have like an array of perks so that people can pick and choose, you know, which ones suit them. For example, with my work, we have volunteer leave, and I haven't used it for the last couple of years just because I've never got round to it, although I think it's obviously a good thing to do. I'm like, I like that, and I like my colleagues who do that. I think that's great for them. I just haven't got round to it for a really long time. So yeah, you have to stress that this actually doesn't change anything for anyone. It just opens up some opportunities for people who want to take advantage. And if people do have family in other countries that they need to fly to, say someone has family in Australia that they need to see once a year, once every other year, this doesn't stop them doing that. It just means that they might do that. And then, you know, in April, where they would usually take a little week in Italy, it means that they can use climate perks to do that. So actually you're not exempt if you do still fly. It just gives people the opportunity, even if someone flies 3 times a year, this gives them the opportunity to swap one of those out for a train journey. Which just starts to normalize that behavior.
Can I jump in here with something extra?
Yeah, please do.
So Emma, am I right in saying most of this is aimed at those leisure trips?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have a similar thing that Alan's brought up in terms of those friends and family flights. And in fact, on our pledge, we have an option simply not to take any leisure flights in the year. So you can be completely flight free for 2021 or whichever year we're doing, or you can pledge not to take any leisure flights, because there are some people who do have family and friends across the world where it is difficult to access by overground means, and also work situations sometimes do require you to take a flight. Obviously, we would encourage people, if they lived close enough to use that lower carbon form of transport, then we would encourage that. And especially with work, like you would be surprised at how willing your employer might be to fork out the extra for that train journey if you just ask. But I think overall, when we look at the statistics and at travel trends, about a quarter of journeys are for family and friends reasons, but 65% are for leisure. So, you know, if we can make a dent in those leisure flights, then we're really getting somewhere.
Mm. And to jump on what you just said about business travel, people often have the sense, I know I did at one point, that, you know, all the people causing the mass amount of flying was just people, you know, wearing suits and flying off on business trips, and that was nothing to do with me. But actually, less than 1 in 10 flights in the UK is for business, and it's on a very much on decline, and it's been stagnant for years. There's not a strong business case for spending money sending people flying all over the globe. So especially post-COVID, the projections are that it'll kind of take care of itself as we move more and more to Zoom. It is really the leisure flights that are on the up. So it is kind of our issue to solve and to lead on. Yeah.
Do you know of any companies that offer flight days or flight days in exchange for doing their business travel on overground means?
Yeah, so you mean like people who can like work, people who can work on the train while they're on the way to a business meeting? Yeah, I do. Increasingly I hear of companies doing this, and ones that come to me who want to kind of do climate perks alongside their changing business travel rules. Often they have policies. Everyone kind of seems to do it slightly differently, but I quite like the policies which say, you know, if you can get there within X amount of time overground, then that's mandatory. And if it's going to take longer than X amount of hours, then fine, you can get a flight. That kind of gives it some flexibility. I think those are a good starting place for people. I mean, obviously my preference would just be no flights for business meetings, but yeah, I'm happy to see people taking steps in the right direction. And it also, like, socially, I think it's really important, because if you fly 5 times a year for work, you're not going to think much of grabbing a couple of extra flights. And in the process of doing that, you know, validate your peers who are doing that, where someone might start to feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't take a flight. You know, I've been seeing about climate change. I've seen the situation in Canada, and it's making me feel bad about flying. Maybe I should think about changing my habits, and I should, you know, think about getting a train this time. I'll hop on the Eurostar. When people do fly around them, that reduces people's kind of conviction to do that, just because you think, well, everyone else is doing it. So yeah, kind of normalizing that train travel. And if we can do that in work travel as well, it just kind of reinforces what we're doing in our leisure time. So I think it's also really important.
Are there any other questions that people would like to ask Emma or Anna?
Can I have a question?
Susie, yes.
I love the climate perks scheme, and thank you both. Thank you, Anna, as well. Your stories are absolutely inspiring. So I'm really interested in the climate perks scheme, and I can totally see why it would incentivize people to swap the flights for train travel. But is there anything related to it, or anything else that you're doing now to encourage people to holiday close to home so that there isn't a need for a big journey?
Yeah, great question. The short answer on climate perks is no, just because we specifically, looked for an area in the market where no one was kind of doing something specific at the time to enable people to take those kind of European trips. And so we specifically chose that, those journeys that were going to take extra time because they were further away. However, obviously we love a staycation, that's we love a staycation, and we love to see people doing that. And some of the employers, the climate perks employers, do also have policies alongside that, encouraging staycations through various means, whether that's financial incentives or that they'll give them, some kind of treat for doing it. A lot of them are also passionate about that. And there are other people working in this space. There's, I believe they're called, I think Anna will probably know them. There's Byway Travel. Am I getting the name right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're a travel agent. So Byway, and it's all their journeys are flight-free journeys. In fact, we just recorded a podcast interview with Kat, who's the founder of Byway.
Oh, brilliant.
And she was very keen to kind of stress that it wasn't just that it was about being flight-free, it was that it was about being slow travel. So slow travel journeys where the journey is as much the star of the show as the destination. And as you can imagine, Susie, at the moment, all of their journeys are UK based just because of the situation we're currently in. And it's about sending people a bit off the beaten track. So, people want to go to Cornwall, but not necessarily to the crowded beaches there. But there are plenty of other wonderful places in Cornwall, in Dorset, in those really popular places where you can find those hidden, slightly off the beaten track things to do. And that's their specialty.
Yeah,
and
fantastic. Thank you.
That's byway.travel if you want to look it up. Oh, look out for our next podcast.
I just put the link in the chat there as well, if anybody wants to have a look.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's also, obviously all of the kind of National Trust and people like that who promote UK kind of destinations. I know that I see them the kind of Visit England and Visit Yorkshire and all of those kind of, I don't even know what they are, organizations, or are they council initiatives? But I see them coming up all over my social media. They claim they're their target audience. Yeah, there's also them who do lots of promotion for that. And I think particularly during COVID, people have come to appreciate the UK a lot more as they've been forced to kind of take, any breaks they could get, which it was at the time just the UK. And I think it kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier around, we kind of need all the eggs in all the baskets at the moment. So where we can get people to staycation, brilliant. Where some people will still want to go to Europe and explore outside of the UK, we want to give them solutions as well. Yeah, Germany did a really cool campaign actually that maybe we can find, Anna might know off by heart, but where they twinned places in Germany with places abroad, and like a really big international destinations to show you can get
that
something.
Was do you just mean like the town twinning initiative that was like after the war?
No,
or is it something different?
Yeah, it was a different thing. It was like
pre-COVID.
It was a campaign. I think it was by the German travel. Maybe it was Visit Germany. What they have over there. I can probably find it. It might have been Deutsche Bahn actually, the train company. But it was really, really cool. And I think we could do with something like that in the UK, twinning places to show. They twin places in Germany with like the Grand Canyon and stuff. So really trying to hype up places. And I think people are into that because people are more into off the beaten track and unknown places and secret places nowadays. People are getting, I think, increasingly kind of bored of the traditional the traditional photo spots. And I think a lot of that is actually driven by social media, because people want a shot and a photo that's different to other people, what other people have. And so there's an opportunity there actually to get people to places that they weren't going before. So everyone's not just flooding into Venice, you know, as they have been. People are instead spreading out into new areas, which obviously is great for the tourism economy as well.
I've got another question, if it helps. I was wondering about if you know of any community organisations, because you can see from the title I'm part of Zero Carbon Haddenham, which is our village climate action group. And so I saw this, and obviously, so Green and Kirkcaldy are clearly doing something about trying to address the flying issue, which seems to be a very difficult nut to crack. And I was wondering if you know of any other community organisations who've run successful campaigns.
Good question, Anna.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of local green campaigns. I think many along the lines of what you're part of, Alan. Zero carbon, or low carbon, or climate friendly, such and such, all these places. And I think those community awareness campaigns and groups are really important. They're really good. I know that there have been, when there was a couple of years ago, lots of councils were declaring a climate emergency. There were lots of council-led initiatives along those lines as well, the climate emergency groups. And so a lot of the local community groups that we work with are based on, specifically on airports. So wherever there's an airport that has expansion plans, which is most of them, local people come together to protest that. So that's also another focus group, although historically airport expansion opposition groups were focused on noise rather than emissions, but I think the emissions has become more a part of the conversation now and recently. Yeah, but there are lots of those local initiative groups, and I think each has their own local target and focus, as well as the general aim of raising awareness of climate action and keeping the local environment more well looked after.
Just coming off the back of Alan's question, maybe it's slightly linked, is an idea about how we have those conversations, those difficult ones about behaviour change. So we're all obviously quite engaged on the issue in this room. So what do we say to people the next time that climate conversation comes up and people are, you know, can't wait till we can fly somewhere? What are we going to say to them to convince them that, without it being too awkward, how do we get that into the conversation?
Oh my goodness, Craig, we could have a whole event on that. In fact, actually, we are doing that. In September, I'm just putting together some plans to have, how do you talk to people about the climate? Because it's such an important one, and it's so tricky, it's so difficult. And I don't know if you agree, Emma, I find it much more difficult to talk to my friends and those close to me than I do to talk to people I don't know. Especially running this campaign, it's really quite straightforward to present to people and to say, you know, could you take the pledge and that kind of stuff, but actually asking my friends to do it, that's hard. It's really hard. I think one of the things you need to remember is that, first of all, it needs to be positive and you need to be nice. We actually recently wrote a blog called On Being Nice. That's on the Be Inspired page of our website, and it's about exactly that. How do you engage people on climate issues? And we can't tiptoe around it. We have to be clear that we're in a climate emergency and this is happening now and needs to be solved. We need to take action. But if you start attacking people for their behavior, then people are going to switch off straight away. It's about giving information, but in a positive way. And what we try to do with our campaign is say to people, rather than you shouldn't be flying, it's more, have you considered traveling in another way? Or even, like, it can be even a bit harder than that, like, do you know what the climate impact is of that flight? And relating it to people, what other people are interested in. And like Emma said before, if people are interested in food waste, if they're interested in recycling, they've got a bit of an in, and that then is perhaps how you start that conversation. I don't know what you think, Emma.
Yeah, this is, yeah, it's such an interesting question, interesting topic to talk about. And I think things have also just changed a lot in the last few years, and more people are aware of climate change now, and it's less of a niche subject, which makes it a lot easier, I think, for us. Because you could even go, oh, do you hear Boris talking about it the other day? Like, it's not like you have to go, oh, have you read this George Monbiot book? It's, you know, very, very mainstream to talk about this stuff, which, yeah, just hugely easier. But I would, yeah, echo what Anna said about being positive. You have to be sensitive about where the person is coming from, like what's their starting point, because, you know, I have friends who, you know, on the surface are very environmental. They always shop at Whole Foods, you know, they drink out of a reusable bottle, who are actually more hard to talk to about this than my friends, you know, who are just kind of don't really get climate stuff, you know, maybe live outside the city but drive a car, you know, work a job that's nothing to do with this. And so, yeah, you really have to think about where you're coming from, what's going to appeal to that person. And I agree with Anna, sometimes you can definitely go in with like, oh, have you considered not? It's so hard to even get the tone of your voice right. Because you really have to, you know, I've definitely said that exact sentence before, like, oh, have you considered maybe getting the train, or I could help you have a look, because I know, you know, for example, there's on the Eurostar, a lot of people will have a look, and they'll have a look for like the next tomorrow, and obviously it's like 180 quid, and they're like, oh, I looked, it was 180 quid, but actually, if you know the tricks of the trade, then you know that Eurostar has a section, which I can link you guys all to, which is like a monthly view of their prices, and you can view month by month like you can at Skyscanner, and then you can pick out the cheapest prices. So you can show them that and go, oh, I used this and I got that for 19 quid, it was so good, and it's so nice, and you don't have to pay for your luggage. You really, yeah, from my point of view, I think you have to kind of sell them on the like good stuff and the fun stuff, and like, oh, I could help you have a look if you wanted to consider it. Plus it's 90% less carbon. You can feel good about yourself. So yeah, you do have to kind of, yeah, you have to play it carefully, but definitely focus on the positives. And sometimes, you know, the reason people do it might not even be environmental at all. Sometimes you can sell it hard enough on the, like, after I did the Italy trip, I came back and I spoke to my friends who had never been environmental, despite my best efforts for the last literal 15 years, have never, you know, quite got it. They always just glaze over when I've tried to speak to them about it in my frantic trying to talk about the climate crisis in my teenage years to them. And yeah, they, you know, yeah, they don't really engage in this stuff. They're just like, they just like going out, they like having fun. They don't like to think about it because it stresses them out. But after I did that Italy trip, you know, I shared all the photos on my social media when I was going round, and the photos on the trains, and it made it look nice. And then they were like, oh my God, this looks so fun. And I came back and I was like, it was the most amazing trip ever. And I went to 12 different places because I got the train so I could stop off. And I found this cute beach and blah, blah, blah. And it didn't even cost more than when I flew, which is true. And I really just sold it to them on that and got excited about it. And then a few of them came to me the next year and was like, we're thinking maybe we want to do a train trip like you did. And it was purely because they, you know, had got excited about the concept of it. And then we ended up going to Croatia. And then they really liked it. And then they ended up getting the coach to Paris the next time they went down there. So I think sometimes you have to remember that they might, if they're not someone who cares about the environment, that might never even be a selling point for them. You might have to think about more creative ways to frame it. And that could definitely be about all the different places you could explore. So yeah, but definitely always coming at it from positive, because if they get a hint that you're judging them, they will just, you know, close up. Yeah, it's just, I've made that mistake many times. So I'm speaking from experience. Yeah, I would advise going in nice.
Sometimes you can go in a little bit harder though. There's, if you've warmed someone up, perhaps.
Yeah,
I do remember. I was interviewed once by someone who I've worked with before, and we had a good professional relationship. And she asked me the kind of killer question, which was, what about, I want my kids to see New Zealand. I want to take my kids to New Zealand. And I said to her, okay, well, here's the reality answer. Do you want your kids to see New Zealand, or do you want your kids to have a future? And she was like, ouch. And that is a real ouch. And you know, you have to have a lot of faith in the relationship you have with someone if you're going to bring that up. But sometimes you can say stuff like that if you're careful.
Yeah, definitely. If you find an opportunity to do that and you feel that they are receptive to that kind of thing, it can really cut
I wouldn't
through.
I wouldn't start with that though.
Yeah. Warm them up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Anna, you said right back at the start of your talk, didn't you, that we all have such an influence on those around us. And I think Emma's story backed it up with what happened with her friends there. And I think you both did it at the start of your talks. You both told us your story and you made it personal. And I think that, you know, and Susie's written in the box, information and inspiration. I think that's what, you know, that you've demonstrated it tonight. So it's really good. Oh, Kitty's got her hand up. Kitty, would you like to come online?
Yes, I was just thinking, Anna, when I was listening to your story, I was thinking about maybe even reframing the way we think about holidays. So I was having a conversation with somebody today that I know would rather fly than take the train to go to Europe. And when I was listening to your story, I was thinking, actually, what's the holiday for? And it's for a lot of people, it's for relaxation, and they want to shed responsibilities as quickly as possible and get to their destination as quickly as possible and leave that suitcase behind as well, so they're not carrying it. But sometimes once you're outside of the UK, you feel differently. And you might go to a destination and then travel on the train from your destination outwards. So if you could almost compartmentalize it and say, how long does it take to leave the UK to get somewhere? And then you stop off on that journey. And it seems like it's a much shorter journey then. And you're doing the stops along the way rather than arriving at your base first of all and then going out and doing extra journeys. And that might make it easier to sell as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you. A lot of what we say is about making the journey as much a part of the holiday as the actual getting there. And you're absolutely right. I think there is a mentality of people wanting to start the leisure time as quickly as possible and as soon as possible. And there is that excitement when you get to the airport and blah, blah, blah. But actually you get that same excitement just being at the train station, and the relaxation starts way sooner. You know, you don't have to queue for hours for check-in. Even for the Eurostar, it's 45 minutes, which is fine. You just sit and have a coffee and then you're called for your train. And the relaxation and the excitement and the holiday starts the minute that train pulls away from the station, and you're on your way, you know. And yeah, exactly as you say, Kitty, it's about reframing it and showing that the benefits of travel are still there, and more so they are there in spades when you travel by train.
I was just going to say, sorry, Craig, that I think we might have we have an extra hurdle or barrier in Scotland, that is that the Eurostar seems a long way away. So I think in Britain we have to be conscious of the regions and different barriers there as well, so that because otherwise another thing to say is, oh well, it's easy enough for you guys because it's just down the road. So we need to think about how we get to the Eurostar, if that's where we want to go in the first instance as well.
You're absolutely right. And sorry, that was really my oversight to just be quite London centric in that sharing.
Not at all. No, I think because that is
quite common.
We do want to promote that, but it's just having a think about that as well in different contexts.
And there are two stories, in fact, on our website, which one of them is from a fellow who lives in Glasgow and went skiing by train with his family. And he said, we just loved our half-term skiing holiday by train. They took the train down to London, stayed one night in London, and then it was just a single train all the way to the Alps after that. And we also have a testimonial from the director of Creative Carbon Scotland, who is based in Edinburgh. And he talks about leisure trips and work trips by train down to London, and either staying overnight in London or taking a sleeper train, and continuing your journey from there. And he says that you will often arrive far more rested than your colleagues who've taken an early flight, which is great for productivity, of course. And yeah, it's a frustration of ours, and I think Emma will probably agree, that when they opened the Channel Tunnel, there was supposed to be sleeper trains from all corners of the UK including Edinburgh, including Penzance, that just never came into, they were supposed to be going through the tunnel at night, and that never came to anything, which is very frustrating. But perhaps with the kind of resurgence of rail, which we're seeing across Europe, we're seeing more sleeper trains across Europe, and the awareness of the climate impact of aviation, which is obviously growing, with those two things, we may well see those night trains going through, leaving Edinburgh 11 p.m. and arriving in Paris in the morning and beyond.
Yeah, I saw a new European rail company. Did you see those the other day? Midnight Rail, I think they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've mapped out a big sleeper network for Europe, and that does include Scotland, which was really nice to see. But yeah, absolutely, it is an extra barrier for you guys. And for anyone thinking about talking to anyone in Scotland about climate perks, just an FYI, we do have a few Scottish employers. We have a couple at least. So you can say there are people doing it there. So I can think of people who are doing it. If you know anyone who's interested to talk about how it works in Scotland. But yes, yeah, totally understand that it's an extra barrier. And I guess everything the same still applies, is you just have to try and make it about it being like fun and having those extra stops being like an exciting thing, because you get to explore more places, including London, if you want to stop off here.
Okay, I'm just looking at the time and we're coming up towards the end. I'll just give Emma and Anna, have you got any last minute things you want to tell us, or any little promotions you'd like to do just before we finish?
I would just say, if you are able to, please do sign our pledge and share it with people. We have had a tricky year convincing people to sign, because of course COVID has dominated the conversation and also kind of distracted us, distracted everyone. So yeah, please do join the campaign if you can, or share it with those that you know. So yeah, it's flightfree.co.uk. Thanks.
And I would just say, yeah, be brave and bold when you're talking to people, but also kind, and don't underestimate the impact that you can have as an individual on people around you, just by saying, when someone says, oh, where are you going to go, I can't wait to fly, even by just saying, oh, actually, I'm thinking, I've signed this flight free pledge, so I'm not going to fly this year, and I'm going to try flying, like, whatever you guys decide is appropriate, but maybe I'm going to try not flying, or I'm going to try flying once every 2 or 3 years on a really special trip. But aside from that, I'm going to really cut down because of climate change. And that doesn't, attack them and say they have to do it too, but people will feel that, people will analyze what they're doing in comparison. So even just starting there, which is super non-confrontational, is really good. So just well done all for just already being engaged in this, and I'm sure you guys are doing the work in lots of ways. And on the climate perks front, yeah, please just do share that with your friends, with anyone you know who works anywhere, has a job who thinks they might like to have that at their workplace. Just get in touch and we will chat to them. Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both of you. It's been really inspirational, and I'm sure we're all going to go and sign up the pledge. And a last little plug from us as well is, you obviously already have found the Green Kirkcaldy website, but please know that there's a Climate Action Fife website as well. There's a brand new one coming just at the start of August, so do have a look at a Climate Action Fife website. And yeah, do keep an eye on the Green Kirkcaldy website and social media as well for upcoming events if you'd enjoyed this one. And I just want to say a big thank you for everyone for coming. Thanks again to Emma and Anna, and we hope to see you again. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm off to look at train journeys now.
Yay.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.